I am really happy to be here today with Lira Kay. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yep.
Okay. So my intention with sharing these lives and recordings is to share, to broaden perspectives on health and share people's stories. And Lira and I were in a business group for entrepreneurs years ago, but I don't think we ever met during that time. And we recently connected online, and she shared her story with me, and it's heartbreaking and also incredibly encouraging. Shows you what people can survive and what can come out of it. So I invited her here to share her story with us today, and I'm really excited to have you here, Lira. So thank you so much for taking the time to come and share your story with me.
Well, thank you, Elaine. I mean, it's an honor, and I know you're doing amazing work in the world, you know, promoting a kind of alternative health methods, and I'm very much into it. And of course, once you know my story, you see why I do my work. It's I want to celebrate.
What you were discussing initially was, you said, well, my story is not about physical health, it's about mental health. And that really struck a chord with me, because all health is all one in my mind. And I learned that through my own personal experiences. And it's one of the reasons why I'm so excited to have you share your story today, is because we have to break this perception that mental health, emotional health is separate from physical health, because we're all one body, and whatever is going on in one area of our lives or in one area of our body is affecting everything else, whether it's from a biochemical thing, like when stress triggers hormones in your body that affect your body on a physical level, or vice versa. There's so many ways that those paths cross. And it's not something that we talk enough about. And there used to be a lot of stigma around mental health. So I really want to break out of that. So without further ado, let's get into your story, and tell me a little bit. I know that you were a psychotherapist, and tell me when and why you went into psychotherapy, and what kind of work you were doing initially in that field.
Mm-hmm. So I became a healer, a spiritual healer and a teacher about when I was 17 years old. So, and that happened because my father was a kind of a big famous artist and a guru, and had his own school, and I kind of joined him at 17 and started learning techniques and healing modalities and etc. And just purely by being on my path, I started working with a lot of people. So when I came to psychotherapy, I was already 20 years old, so I took like 3 gap years before I went to college, just doing the work, and it was amazing. But I always felt a bit insecure about doing the work, because it was like spiritual work. What is she doing? What is this energy thing? What is this thing? And I felt that I need to have some kind of education, some kind of degree to show that I'm qualified, and actually what I'm doing has got some premise somewhere. And it could be scientific. And so I studied psychology. Of course, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I had my own therapy, which is great. I think this is like why I believe healers need healing for sure, because otherwise we'll be triggered. And so I went through all the process. However, when I started working and practicing as a psychotherapist, I worked with a lot of cases of abuse, abandonment, sexual abuse, all sorts of things, and primarily with kids or parents. And it was heartbreaking. It was such a hard sort of just practice. And what I've noticed, and I always knew as a spiritual teacher and a healer, that, well, there's something after that. There's life after pain. And I was very interested in that. Naturally, I think I'm a futurist. I'm always looking for the next thing rather than just being stuck in an analysis and, you know, why it happened and what's the consequences and feeling good. Mine is more like, well, where do you go from there? So parallel to that, as I was having my degree and doing my other spiritual work, I worked with a lot of gifted kids and people generally who would have all sorts of interesting spiritual gifts. And so it was kind of parallel. And my studies in psychology, my paper in psychology was all about spiritual awakening through personal crisis. So I was really analyzing the crises that people go through and what happens after that. What's the result? What's the growth? So kind of, I would say my work was kind of at the edge of psychology and spirituality, and I studied a lot of religions, etc. So, and as I graduated, I knew that I should be doing my work as I always did, but now I just had a good basis. So I just continued being a healer, spiritual teacher. I didn't want to call myself a psychotherapist because I was frustrated with the system even then. I was just, I mean, in my case, we were taught to do things very fast, very different from, I think, the systems that are in United States or in, I lived in England after that. So, and I was even more frustrated with this kind of long-term prolonged healings of people going for decades into therapy and it's just nothing happened. I was trained to do things fast just because of the nature of insurance in Estonia, which is free. Health, it was free, and that meant government doesn't want to pay for prolonged therapy. That means you have 3 sessions with a, you know, with somebody with a heavy case, and you do what you can, and you do like best work, which we did, of course. And of course, now it helps me to be a coach because it's very result oriented, very focused work, and you have agenda, not just kind of sitting contemplating. It's not about self-discovery, it's more about how can we make you functional, and then in my case, how can you make you successful? Like, I'm very interested in making people successful rather than just normal. So so that's my psychotherapist story.
Yeah, so just to recap a little bit, you were already doing alternative type of things. You felt like you really needed some credentials. You went to school, you saw more, even deeper, the benefits of what you were doing before, saw some of the weaknesses within the psychotherapy professional, the way that it was defined, especially within the medical model, because you were living in Estonia at the time, and they had, what's the correct word? Is it national healthcare or?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you were very limited in what you could offer. You weren't allowed to say, you know, I need to see you for 6 months or a year. You were told that this is the only thing that you were able to offer your clients, and you needed to only do what you could manage within those couple of sessions that you were allowed. So you were seeing the frustrations of the system as well. Really interesting. And so you were getting back into your what you had originally started out with, but now you had this additional training, which gave you a lot of different insights. And it's curious to me how that played out in your life, how that may have come in. So, so just from a time frame perspective, you were in your early 20s or mid 20s when you graduated from school. When did you meet your husband, and will you share the details of that whole story? Because I know that he had a mental illness or a diagnosis, and we haven't discussed that yet. So I'd like you to share the details of that in any way that you'd like to.
Well, it's all started very, I would say it was like a whole like a romance that like I think a lot of girls are, at least in my days, would be fantasizing about. He was a professor in my college. He wasn't my professor. He spoke like 5 languages. So he was teaching languages. I was studying psychology like next door. And when we met, it was a love from first sight. So we got married very quickly. In fact, I had a wedding and the next day I graduated. So it was like all, I was 24, I was young. In Russia, that's like the normal time to get married. So it wasn't anything unusual. And he was totally fine. So there was no signs of mental illness. There was nothing like that. I thought, that's it. I was coming from a family of divorced parents. So for me, that was really a mission to have a marriage and to have a normal relationships, because I knew I was struggling within myself. I had no role models. So it was a big deal for me, like to be married and to have children. And so I was doing the dream. For me, that was the dream life. And we were married for 10 years. And to be honest, for the first 6 years, there was really nothing alarming happening at all. It was just a very good marriage. We were, like people would tell us, we were a beautiful couple. We had 3 kids. We were just, we traveled a lot. I moved countries at the time. So I lived in England, doing my work, doing my art, just working with people. So it was just whole, I would say, quite a good life. And somewhere 6 years in, and later on, he started having an addiction. It was actually just drinking. And, people would say, nothing, it's nothing. But of course, living with that, when you, at least in my eyes, that was like really kind of like, I see what's going on. I see that it's not like normal. And there was this, it's really actually now thinking about it, going back, I can't see the sane reason why I was, or why we all lived in such kind of like secluded sort of place where we would not talk about it, because nobody was talking about it. I remember going to visit his family and trying to tell them that you can't pour him a drink because he's gonna go on a spiral, and we're fighting here, like we don't have drinks at home and stuff like that. And nobody would believe me, and they would like, hey, this is just, oh, it's not serious, everybody does it. So I was like, okay, for me, but I already knew that, okay, this is, and of course, as a psychotherapist, I already could understand that there's some underlying issues. Let's look at it, let's try. And of course, you can't and you shouldn't treat your own family. That's not normal. Doesn't really work this way. So I felt really, really frustrated, just sort of being the kind of out there playing the nurse. This is what happens, I think, with all the family members. They're trying hard, they kind of hover around, and it actually doesn't help. So that was, and when his mom died, that's when that was when it just went into self-harming, and this is when he started going to therapy and etc. And this is my very kind of very sad encounter with the system, when they would just prescribe pills. And he was, I think, misprescribed pills, misdiagnosed first. And so there's a certain interesting differences between depression, being diagnosed as with depression or with bipolar. So in this completely different set of pills you should be given. So he was given the wrong ones. And those are the ones that make you suicidal. And we kind of went through this, and it was pretty scary. Like, just, I don't know how kind of, I remember having small kids trying to hide it from them. I mean, I don't know. I think it was traumatic for everybody. Kids were really, really small at the time. So I had a 9-year-old, 6-year-old, and a 4-year-old. So of course, I'm pretty sure they, of course, I mean, later on, we all went to therapy or healing because of that, because of course it affects everything. There was a lot of anxiety. On the surface, people thought everything's fine. That, I think, was really strange, because I guess I could have talked about it. I just felt so alone and ashamed, and so kind of like, you can't share this because it's so weird what you live through every day when you see a lot of like really, really disturbing stuff that's happening in your house. So you kind of like, at least that's what I was like, okay, that's taboo. You don't talk about this stuff. And in England, especially, people are very nice and polite. How are you doing? Fine. So I was just feeling that you can't talk about this stuff. And when actually he did die eventually, it was really strange, because I suddenly, when it was all out, it was like really dramatic outcome, in the newspapers, and oh my gosh, look at her. This is what she was living, and people didn't know, except that's what happened. And I was working at the time with kids, like doing my psychology work. And I remember that people started coming to me and telling me their stories. And that's what I found the most fascinating and kind of sad, that people are behind the closed doors, live a lot of drama, and they don't talk about this. I had conversations about this, the same thing happened to me. I lived with that. This is what happened to me, and on and on and on. My colleagues, my friends, some strangers who knew about my story would come out and tell me all of those things that were happening behind the closed doors. And I was just looking at myself and thinking, why nobody told me that before. Why? And, you know, partially maybe it's my fault that I didn't go and talk about this, but I didn't even know where to go. Like I kind of was completely, I think, was I terrified of judgment? Maybe, I'm not sure. I think I just felt that it's nobody's business. Nobody wants to really know about this. Everybody wants to have a good life, and we were still perceived as a very nice couple. And he was, you know, he still managed to have a job. So as far as everybody else was concerned, everything was fine. And if I ever brought that up, if it's in a family or somewhere, people would like, no, it's not that serious. I said, it's pretty serious. I
Yeah.
know.
Well, I
So
can
that was
see
kind
why
of
you would have
reality.
gone into isolation based on how you were, the initial reaction that you had when he just had the addiction and he was drinking and you were concerned about his behavior and you were pointing it out to people and you were getting passed off. You know, though that's just normal. And then when things got more serious, you know, by that time you had already learned that message. So I can easily see why you would not have felt comfortable reaching out. And it was a completely new experience for you as well. So you didn't know that there were other people there that had experienced the same things or would have been there for you. So looking back on the time frame, it looks like you said you were married for 10 years. The first 6 years were good. And then the drinking started. And then after his mom passed, things really escalated for him. And he did the therapy, but the medications, it sounds like, were misdiagnosed and didn't help the situation, if I'm understanding that correctly. And so there was probably a 4-year period where you went through a lot of difficulties with him and trying to help him understand and watch him also spiral out of control. I'm sure that was that correct? It was 4 years.
Yeah, it was 4 years, and at the beginning, you know, I think I just had my third baby, so it was, you know, like you could imagine the, you know, excuses. You could say, of course, it's hard. Your life is hard, you know. And I'm such a trooper. I'm always like on the go, like I can do this. I'm a strong woman, so I was not really. I would always have excuses for everybody else and say that's okay. Like he needs time. He needs to recover or something. And
Right.
he tried the AA. I remember all of, like now I remember, I kind of like honestly wiped it all out of my mind 4 years afterwards. But if now going back and trying to remember, I think he tried AA. Like there was of course things available. He tried therapy. And what I found really frustrating, how therapy would, or therapists at least in that specific system, which was England, they didn't want to go deeper. They would start treat addiction before asking him a question like, why are you doing this? There's a reason, which is of course depression, or what is it, bipolar, what is it? And that's what they didn't look at. And I was, I remember at some point I was saying, could you go and tell them that they should look into the reasons, not just treat, not just do some cognitive behavioral stuff, because so what, they're going to tell you don't drink. It doesn't work like this. It's like if there's underlying reasons, you're going to be doing some other addiction. This is what happens often with people who go to AA. I mean, I've studied that a lot, obviously. I've written a book about, you know, addictions and etc. But one of the things that if there is a premise for addictive behavior, it's to do with unreleased emotional pain, with traumas, and a lot of things that happened way earlier than when we're looking at the consequence of that. And if you're not addressing it, you can, I mean, you can physically prevent somebody from the drug of choice. They will replace it with something else. That's all. And that often happens with AA people. So it's like you just, you know, you need to go deeper as a healer, as a therapist. And that was, I remember that time I was just really thinking about it and feeling that I don't have a say. I can't, you know, like, I mean, I remember once we went actually to a therapist together. He said, I want her there. And that's when I actually learned a lot about his childhood and a lot of traumatic things that happened there. And of course it was playing out. But it was already too late. By the time they got to, he was already in hospitals, like all the time, with all the scary stuff that we dealt with. And it was already too late. It's like, I think those 4 years could have been spent in a much better way. And we
I think you can parallel that to a lot of physical health issues as well. So I think it's a really important story to share and have people have the knowledge that oftentimes we feel like something comes out of the blue, not necessarily with an emotional thing, but a physical thing in particular. But actually, the research shows that a lot of diseases build over decades, so that childhood traumas and the way that you treated your body and the food that you were had access to, all of these things can compile very slowly over time, and then all of a sudden just come out in this big massive way that feels like it's all of a sudden, but it was building and building and building, and one thing on top of the other. And you know, emotional issues and mental issues are definitely part of that. And I agree with you that it's really tragic that by the time those pieces came out, it was too late. He was too far gone. That happens so frequently, but there's so much we can do with any aspect of our health on a day-to-day basis, on a lifestyle basis, on a long-term basis, to be making choices, to be getting through those things, and not to have shame around the fact that you're hitting a wall with something because of the whole history of your life, everything that's piled up. We all have stuff. None of us have perfect childhoods, perfect environments, and addressing those things is still courageous because it's still not accepted in the way that it needs to be. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited to create awareness around it. But we also have to take back responsibility for our own bodies and our own lives. And because we're the only ones that can be that primary caretaker, and to step up and say, yeah, this happened to me and it would be painful to release it from my body and to have to think about it again, but it could save my life and it could change the quality of my life dramatically. It's so, so important. And it's not necessarily as painful as somebody might think. With all the new tools that we have available to us, there are lots of people that can facilitate that in a way where it's not like you have to keep recycling the trauma in your head. It's understanding where it is, where it's living in your body, and then how to release it in the best way that works for your unique body and your situation. So many incredible tools that we have, and it's a really important, just a really important note, so that shift the way they think about that. I wanted to have you clarify a little bit more. You mentioned that he did pass away, and I believe that you had shared with me that he took his own life.
Yeah.
And how, one of the things that I'm aware of, that I know not enough people are aware of, is that you mentioned that the medication can make you suicidal, and a lot of people aren't aware of that, and they're being misprescribed, or they're not being filled in on that portion of how a medication can control your mind. And so if you would be willing to share a little bit more about your thoughts on that, about his medication, and what you know about it, and how much you do or don't feel like that played into the fact that he did end up ending his own life.
Yeah. So I think there was like two separate almost stories about that. So first one, when we definitely saw, okay, that's an addiction. The drinking that's happening is not, it's not normal. It's not like whatever, it's like, it's definitely damaging and it's disturbing. So he went to seek help. And that's the first time they gave him some kind of medication, whatever standard thing they would give to people with either anxiety or with depression, which I'm not gonna give the names because he went through so many, but whatever that was, I remember what happened, that he would just feel fine, like numb, and then he would drink, even worse. And I would say, what is this? Because what you need to be doing is, maybe, yes, it's could be painful, whatever. Work with a therapist, with a real person who's actually talking with you about whatever, finding the reasons, instead of numbing the pain and then feeling like you're indestructible. And that's what happened. And I remember I was like, he actually started drinking more. It was much more severe. And he was very healthy actually physically. So I was always shocked, like, how can he drink so much, like every day? Like, how is it possible to be alive after this and then even go to work and be totally functional and smile and be a kind of a normal guy out there? But the medication made him completely numb and oblivious to reality. And that was like the scariest thing. So one of the principles of psychotherapy is that to go through the process, you need to be aware and present. Mm-hmm. You see? So it's like defeats the purpose. As soon as people are prescribed medication, this is pretty much the chance for therapy and healing is already lost at this point, because they don't really feel bad anymore. So they just go around like, it's like there's no like great, it's not that life is not great, but it's just, I don't feel anything.
Right, flat.
And the reason to have an addiction, as now I've, like I said, studied and written a book, and I kind of studied, really did a lot of research at the time as well. The whole reason for addiction is that because there's unreleased pain you don't want to feel. So addiction in itself covers up the pain. And now plus the medication, I think it's just like, wow, what a unhealthy system we really have. So that was the first part. And the second part was, of course, later on when the self-harming started, and kind of like, really, it was like, now it's obvious. So now the last 6 months when when again, the doctors, the hospitals and all of that conversation started, then they started looking into diagnosing properly, not just treat it as an addiction as they would just before that. It was like, just whatever, just don't drink, do something, take a minute, like whatever, go sleep, or like that's the approach. I was like, wow. And then afterwards it's more like, okay, let's look, well, why, like what's this thing? And that was like, so he went through all sorts of diagnoses, and bipolar was one of those. And as far as I know, so I'm not a specialist in medication, so I'm not gonna, I just seen it kind of as an outlooker, somebody who's like lives with a person like that. So that's what I've seen, is that the biggest danger for somebody with bipolar to actually harm themselves or kill themselves is when they are on high, when they are manic, not when they are depressed. So giving people antidepressants at that point, there's no really, that's what makes it. It's like, so there was this, later on I know, because hospitals were, I remember signing some papers that I'm not going to sue them, that something like that. I was in such shock and in such grief. So I don't, like, it kind of was like a blur. So I signed whatever papers, but later on when I was thinking about it, like, what were they trying to protect? What were they trying to do? And then I realized, oh, of course, it's completely different medication you give people with bipolar. And if you give them antidepressants, the things escalate, and it's actually, which is exactly what happened. He kind of completely lost the feel of reality, like he didn't see what he was doing. And I remember, like, when he would be in his sane moments, he would be suffering so much that he does it to himself. I know those.
I think that's really amazing insight that you just shared. So thank you for that. And I cannot even imagine how incredibly painful and difficult it must have been for you, and especially with 3 small children, and for the children to have lost their father, and how do you even survive something like that?
Well, I would say not very well. That's the answer. I remember I was told by people, oh, you should go have therapy. a dharma therapist, I mean, I could have understand it, but I was so angry with the system. I was like, I am not going to be treated by somebody who doesn't even want to look into the cause of things. And I've done a lot of spiritual work at the time, so I kind of had to grasp what happened from the very spiritual point of view, because there's a lot of things were involved, not only in just losing somebody you loved and had a, you know, like we had a real, it was a real romance. It wasn't like just a whatever marriage. It was really, I mean, we were soulmates, and I hoped we were gonna live like this forever. So it was like a really, it was loss. But at the same time, I also felt so guilty because I was the healer. I was the therapist. How could I have not helped? So there's a lot of played into that as well. So I was kind of like, I was so hard on myself. It was like all happening parallel, that when you're trying to deal with the grief, but also and the grief I had for 4 years. So like, honestly, by the time it happened, I was just like, oh my gosh, it's just another night. I don't have to wait for him to die, because that was life.
I have no trouble understanding that.
Yeah, so, and I shut down, I have to say. I shut down emotionally. I couldn't really talk about it. I couldn't tell my kids. And honestly, I don't know whether it's the right thing to do or wasn't. I mean, it wasn't the right thing to do. We lived the aftermath of all of this later on. 8 years later, it's all kind of came out, and with a lot of drama. My kids were teenagers, so but at least when I was, you know, for the 8 years, I felt like I was protecting them. And so they kind of lived. They didn't really know, or I hoped that they didn't know.
They didn't know what had happened.
They didn't know what had happened, yeah, because he was a very good dad. Everybody knows him as a good man. So, you know, so I was like,
Yeah.
Also that was behind the scenes.
So just supporting them through the fact that he was gone, but not letting them know that he actually chose.
Exactly.
Did it.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, even now still, I don't know, was I right to do it, or was I wrong to do it? Maybe I should have told them, but I remember I just couldn't.
I don't think that anybody can make that decision in a everyone's doing the best they can. When you get into a situation of grief and survival mode, like, I don't even think you can have that higher, like, knowing what I know about the way stress hormones work in your body, when you're in a massive stress response, you don't have access to that higher reasoning. So I don't think that anybody can make that kind of decision. All you can do is the best that you can do.
Yeah, and I was very, I mean, also there was other things that happened that were, you know, on a practical level. I was alone. I was a single mom suddenly. Imagine, like, with a mortgage, with all this, like, I mean, that was pretty scary. And I was just the type of personality I was very soft and very spiritual, and doing my work and doing my art and doing all this healing. So it was not like I think I was just not prepared for any of this. Like, I wasn't prepared to to take care of practical life.
Right.
I remember sitting there and crying over what happened, and also crying over the pile of bills I have to pay. And I just don't know how to do it. That was it was like such a complex thing, plus trying to keep my face for my kids, and just take them to school every day and bring them back. Everybody's looking at me. All the neighbors are looking at me. Oh my gosh, look at her. And it was this whole scope of kind of life that happened afterwards. And I did kind of, I went a lot into trying to find my strength and just having that faith somehow, because I'm not a religious person, so I wasn't doing anything like going to church or stuff. That was just not me. But I was definitely, looking inside and speaking to source, and just trying to understand what is this, because I felt I'm a good girl. Why those things would happen to me? I only did good in this world. Why? So that was also another, like, a very existential question. And I think what I learned was to ground, to land into reality, to land into, like, I feel like I was going from my la la land into the, okay, this is the harsh reality you now have. And this is what you have to deal with. And you have to get strong, because you can't be just thinking a lot about this thing. You have to actually do stuff, like find the cash to pay the next bill. What are you going to do with the house? Like, you can't afford it. So things like that. That was like, it was on the plate. Like, I remember that. So it was interesting. And, looking back, I was actually mentioning it to somebody another day. When I teach business now, I say, when you're afraid of rejection, or what do people say, or sales, or what's not, whatever people are afraid of in business, I always say, when you look back, all of us had times when we had to toughen up and live through emotional pain, whatever that pain was. And if I ever doubt myself, which I don't much, I think that's what happened. I just saw myself come out of that on the other side. And now I have such a respect for myself. And I'm thinking, wow, because when I see people, I work with people in crises all the time, and I see how they fall apart and how they don't believe that they can live through this. But I always say, listen, we can, because I know that I lived through this. And look at me now, right? It's like we are much stronger than we think, and including psychologically.
Yes.
So that's kind of, but of course it came at expense. Yeah, it came at expense of losing that softness, losing that, like, I'm so light and I'm so enlightening. I was not that anymore. I was much more like, okay, this is what reality is, and you have to get a grip, and kids first, life first, then myself somewhere. So it took me 8 years to come back to myself. So that's another story.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that it took that a length of time. That's an incredible story, just of pain and shifting, and it's amazing. And I know that you have since remarried, and you mentioned a little bit about your kids. So you said something to me that your second husband gave you an ultimatum, and that was a really big shift for you. So will you share that story? Because it sounds like while you managed and survived what happened over those 8 years, you were still stuck in some ways. And there were other things that then came along and happened to shift you out of that stuck state, for lack of a better word. That might not even be accurate. So feel free to choose a different word if it works better.
Yeah. So I remarried later on to a wonderful man, and it was a very romantic story. And it was, the real kind of like the second, I even when I was, remember thinking about this, I was like, the second chance Cinderella story. It was like really beautiful. And he adopted my kids, and we had extra 2 kids. So I have 5 daughters now. And we traveled again. We lived in France. We moved around. So it was just kind of a beautiful life, really, as other people would say. And I would say too, I was really enjoying or like even surprised at the fact that I can love again, that I can trust again, and I can just relax. And I don't know whether I was relaxed specifically, but I was at least having this normality and enjoying the life. And life in south of France is very nurturing for your body, for your, and so I was really, really enjoying it. But I was always working as well. So that's another thing about me. Maybe it's just my personality, who knows, but at some point, but I remember when I started business, so we moved to the States later on and moved kind of a couple of times in between that. So I ended up here in California, and that's when I started my business. And I think in business at the time, all the trainings I had done were promoting hustle, do a lot of things, to just run around, do a lot of things. So I was doing a lot of things because, and I almost found some kind of like a strain, you know, like I would say weird, unhealthy kick out of that, because it would take me away from, I had to feel something. So now that, like, partially actually why I wrote my book about addictions is it was about that. It wasn't about my first experience. It was about experiencing myself being a workaholic. So that was really the reason, because I knew what addiction looks like. And my addiction wasn't any drugs or anything like that. It's just like not my thing. But work was something I would just put myself out there and just do it. And I worked with, and already over my lifetime, I worked with hundreds of people, thousands of people at that point. So it was just a natural thing to do, is to to take myself away from my own life and just serve others out there. So partially when I'm working now with people, I work with a lot of people like that, because they went through their own dip and crisis and what's not. They find comfort in service and helping others. Yeah. But there's a wrong reason for this. You see, like and your business, by the way, will grow or not because of the reasons, because of the intentions. Like, why are you doing it? Because it's very likely that if you are escaping your own pain, you're going to be doing things that are not going to actually progress you. You're just going to do more things, because those are the ones that bring you comfort on a daily basis, because you're busy. So I was busy. My kids are growing at the same time. My second husband he's taking care of everything. He's being a good dad, good husband. And at some point I remember I'm coming back from another workshop I did, another free workshops. I was doing all of those things locally here. People know me, like now meet me on the streets, tell me you changed my life. So I'm coming in home again, one of those Saturdays, leaving my kids behind and saying, oh, I just saved so many lives. Like, like people all those women would tell me, Lira, you're the best, So I was like bathing in that, you see. It was like my kick, my fix was this, like I'm helping others, you see. And he said, Lira, you have to get a grip. Like, this is it. Like, we want you home. We want you present, because you look at your teenagers, and my teenagers were going through this very dangerous times for themselves, dip, drama, growing up, unfortunately, we were, a lot of diagnoses, all sorts of things we went through again. It's almost like history started repeating itself. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I have to learn this. Like as always, I brought a lot of spirituality. I'm on my path, and I know that, I'm always looking at what else is happening besides the practical things. And I was thinking, wow, that life lesson is kind of haunting me. What am I learning? What am I learning here? Why is it happening again? And which is my lesson was a lesson of separation, because I think what I was trying to do, I was trying to create this perfect life, very controlled. I'm doing things I know I'm doing. I'm very good at this, so I'm gonna do that. I'm not good at sales. I was so bad. Like I couldn't sell to save a life. Obviously, that was the problem, because I was just doing kind of playing the game of business. None of it was profitable. I was just taking myself away from my reality, which was my family, and which was the kids that need you. And where's the mom? And why is mom talking about all this stuff, but she's not actually being present? So that was my thing. And ultimatum was, Lira, my husband is super smart. So he's like, you have to actually probably either go to therapy or something, because whatever you're doing, it's not healthy. And I understand that there must be reasons for that. You want to go and do something, because I think you're just running away from your pain, and you just don't want to see this. You don't want to live in this reality, because your kids are displaying the same symptoms right now, and you're just trying not to see it. And but it's happening, so you have to deal with this. And I'm the stepdad, like it's not even my job, right? It's your kids. And that it was very hard. It was very hard to land again and just to I call it like get those shades off, the pink shades where you think life is awesome.
Colored glasses. Yep.
Yes. People thought I'm very successful. I was writing I was always like, I was writing books about happiness. I was all this, celebrated. People knew me. I had a big kind of like little profile here. I was famous for my work. And at the same time, there was things I had to deal with that were much harder than being successful. So that was the ultimatum. That was, it took me, I'm a very serious person. So if I see things like that, and again, like I told you before, I was determined to have a good marriage, because it just means a lot to me to have love in my life, because I understand that I can do my work. That's like never been an issue for me, but I wanted to save the marriage. I wanted to have my kids happy. I wanted to be a good mom, if you want. So I did a lot of work on myself to be able to just sort it out. And the work I did was not just some healing work, even though I did healing work as well, but it was a lot of it was just looking at real things, looking at all of my kids, creating those relationships again, recreating, really reigniting, I would say, what was lost. Some relationships were lost. That's it. I had to let it go. So I call it the lesson of separation. This is when I had to let go of control as well and think, okay, you know what, Lira, you're not going to have this perfect life. It doesn't matter how much you hustle. Doesn't matter how much effort you make. The whole desire to control everything is already unhealthy, because it's a lot of anxiety behind it, really. And instead, I had to do a lot of accepting of my own personality, guilt issues. That was huge part of why I was working so hard, because I tried to really, I felt like I just have to help so many people because I couldn't help this one. It's like the silence of the lamb. It was like my story a lot. So yeah, so that was the story of ultimatum.
So one of the things that I've been exploring a lot lately is societal constructs. And I just want to interject here, because it's clear when you're talking about your marriage that it's something that's very important to you, and not necessarily because somebody else told you, it's because you want it. And I think a lot of people can get caught up in what they think they should have, or what they've been raised to believe they should have, without actually questioning what they want. And that can lead us astray in so many different ways. And I just wanted to point that out, because I think it's so valuable. Only you can decide what's right for you. And if your marriage is really important to you, or being married is important to you, or having children or not having children, if those are really big decisions, and they are entirely up to you whether or not those are things that you want in your life. And so this was like a time of reprioritizing for you. You had been enjoying your work, and you were really enveloped in it, but there were things that were important to you that were falling apart, or that's just the words that popped into my head, not as good as they could have been. And so you had to take a hard look and shift things for yourself in order to align with your priorities. So tell us about that, about how your family shifted and how your work shifted around that once you took a good hard look at that and realized that you wanted a different choice.
Yeah, that is like, I would say it's kind of like I was growing up so fast through that experience, because I was, like, besides, I kind of actually created a program for myself. I was already a life coach, so I was used to doing all those programs, but I was like, no, I need one. And I created a team around it because as a coach, I already knew the best way to do it is to hire people. It's not, don't sit there by yourself. I've been there by myself decade ago. I already know where that leads, which is like literally suffering alone. And I was not doing that again. So I remember I had, it was really almost funny, a kind of laughable experience with a therapist in States, because I've, you know, I remember actually that experience. I laugh about it because it's just so ineffective. And there, when I work with people who go to that kind of therapy for decades, they tell me the same story. I went to a therapist because I committed. I told my husband I will do what I can, which, okay, I will go to therapy, even though I hate the whole, even thinking about it. But I researched, I found this therapist is okay. He's supposedly good. So I went there. Thankfully, he didn't prescribe me any medication. That's good. But that's pretty much how they typically start. So, okay, I thought maybe that's a good sign. So at least I'm not on any medication. Because that would be really hard pill to swallow. I'm just like so pill free forever. Like I'm super, like I take a lot of good care of myself spiritually and health wise. So I don't do any doctors.
Right, that just wasn't a choice that you
It just wouldn't be an option. But I remember going to a therapist I committed to 6 months. I managed 5. I would go every week. I remember even just going into the car, I would already start bawling, crying uncontrollably. I would go in there and I would cry, 45 minutes cry for 5 months every week. Can you imagine? The therapist didn't say a word. He just sat there. And when I said after 5 months, I said, you know what? This is not helping, because I know I can come next week and cry again, but that's not effective at all, because I want to be better. I want to be feeling better. This is not something I want to continue with. And that's the first sentence he said, Lira, I will miss our sessions. I said, I won't. I won't miss those sessions.
Okay.
So it's all, like I said, it's kind of funny, right? So that was my funniest story with a therapist. So then I hired myself a coach. In fact, she's amazing, and now she became my client actually, because the work that I do is about charging for your brilliant work. And she was brilliant. She was a PhD, and plus she is incredibly creative like myself. She worked with grief and loss. And she had like 3 documentaries out there. She was like a really, really amazing creative coach with a very good psychology degree. So I was like, okay, this is good for me, because I've seen other coaches already who, of course, I certified with, and a lot of coaches unfortunately don't know what they're doing. It's like a lot of this manifesting abundance and positive affirmations, and I already knew that's not enough for my situation. I need to go deeper than let's just think positively and avoid the pain, which is like I've done avoiding the pain. That's it. So I wanted somebody who would understand how to deal with some kind of traumatic past losses, real stuff. So she was, and she was brilliant. I learned a lot. And at the same time, I was creating this program on the side where I was really supplementing with a lot of the spiritual work that I was doing for myself, and I already knew how to do. And in a year, I would say I was a different person. Like now I say it took 2 years, but like the whole healing process was about a year of very, very intensive work. I'm very, obviously I love healing work. So I investigated, I've studied, I've researched, I tried it all out, everything that's possibly was out there to heal myself. And I called it, like, after all, what if I could recommend anybody anything, that if you're going through hard times, the biggest thing that I came out with was self-love, because it was maybe the hardest. It was like at the basis of all of my troubles was that I could not love myself. I just could not. I felt I'm not deserving after what happened. This guilt, I had to deal with that. I had to somehow forgive myself. So it was hard process, and I've gotten there. gotten there, and I remember I was leading this workshop locally, and I remember 50 women came to that, and it was called Self-Love for Women or something. And I prepared this speech. I remember writing the speech about my, how we should love ourselves and everything. And when I saw them and looking at me, and just in the eyes, I saw that don't give me bullshit, because we're really suffering. And I remembered what I was. And if somebody started telling me this, I call it watered down wisdom about loving yourself, how lame is that? Like, it's not good enough. And that when I was like, I put that polished speech aside, and I said, listen, guys, I have something for you. And which is a very vulnerable thing to do. I mean, like, I don't think I could repeat that again. I can talk about it, but I can't repeat that, the actual factual thing, that what I did. I had, when I started my journey of my own healing, I actually made a video for myself, because I was such an escapist that I had to commit, and I had to make that promise to myself that I will heal myself and I will love myself. And that was this video where I was crying with a snot. It was like ugly, ugly tears with yourself. Like, I was sitting in the garden. There was no witnesses to that. But I recorded that for me so I could remember why I started this whole thing. Like, I'm committed. That's what I told myself. And so when I was on that workshop, it spontaneously came out. I said, actually, you know what, guys, if you're expecting those kind of workshops to be this polished thing, I said, well, actually, this is what self-love journey really looks like. At least that's what it looked like for me. And I showed that video to them. Yeah. And we all 50 and 51 of us cried and cried and cried, because that's, and that is, of course, I had, like, it's almost kind of launched me in a completely different way as a healer, because it's all became very real. It's became, healing is not really a polished thing. It's ugly.
Yes.
It's ugly, it's painful, and it's freaking worth it. It's worth it, because now I'm looking at myself now, I think, wow, I'm a different person. I'm not that toughened up that, 10 years prior to that was shutting everything down to pay her bills or to bring up her kids. It was just like exactly what I was, because I lost a lot of sensitivity. I lost a lot of like real joy. Like, I tried so hard for the 10 years, and now I was like, no, it's because I have to come back to myself and find who I am again, and which I did, and it was like the best thing ever.
I think there's so many important points in your story that I want to highlight a little bit. One is, it took time. We often have a quick fix mentality, and that's not the way our bodies work and heal. And especially can be multiple layers. So you can work through one thing, and then there's something else that comes up, and it's the physical body and the mental body working together. If you're not taking good care of your body physically, if you're eating junk food or abusing alcohol or whatever, then your ability to break through to those mental, emotional issues is going to be limited. So it works in conjunction, and that the traditional therapies aren't necessarily going to be the fix that people are looking for. You have to look outside of the box. You have to put your own investment into it. Your insurance isn't necessarily going to cover it. You have light coming through right now.
I know. I was like, should I get rid of it? I don't know how to get rid of it. It's from the window. So it's just
pretty. And it takes commitment. And like you said, sometimes it can be hard to face those kind of things. And it can be painful. But what you get out of working through it is so much better than where you were, that it is so worth it. Like, it almost takes it can be uncomfortable in the moment, but it makes it so worth it. It's like athletic training, I guess. I'm not a high-end athlete by any means, so I don't know if I'm making a good comparison, but I can only imagine the intensity that you must feel in your body when you have to train for a marathon or for the Olympics or something like that. That's hard. But the rewards of that, the fitness level, the accomplishment, it's the same thing. Like, it's hard to get through, but it's so incredibly worth it. And so I'm really grateful that you shared your story in that way. And when I'm going to use like cracked open and share that that really messy part of your breakdown with other people, how that connected with them, because we all have this, and our societal expectation is, you know, we keep it polished and we keep it professional and we don't share our dirty laundry and all of this kind of stuff, but everybody has something. And when you share it with the right people, it resonates so deeply and it's healing for everybody. So you can find community in that. So don't be afraid um, of like sharing that kind of stuff, but do be careful about who you share it with, because some people won't get it, and they will make things worse, like what you were experiencing when you were sharing your first husband's addiction and you were getting shut down by people. You know, there's people that will get you and there are people that won't get you, and there's many more people now than there ever has been that want to do this deep work, that want to have that deep connection. So you know, if you don't know anyone in your circle right now, just be open to finding them, because there are definitely people out there, and there are great coaches and programs and all kinds of things that you can get involved in to find that healing and that support. So really, we touched on all those points that I think are so super important. So how, you know, how many years into this are you now? You know, that from that ultimatum and this big shift in your life, that you've really healed all of these things for yourself?
It's around it's around 4 to 5 years now. Yeah.
It also shifted the way that you work. So I want to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even from the start, you know, I've been doing my work now for 30 years, and as a healer, and obviously, you know, energetically I do attract people who at least that's how I maybe show up in the world, that people feel very safe to tell me about what they really live. And I think when I went through my own stuff and came out, I would say came out, I had many comes out in my life, but that was another one of those, I think, very serious one. I've definitely, I started creating programs that would not ever go on a surface. Like, I don't even bother anymore. I think the difference between the coaching or healing work that I do is like, we bypass all the positive thinking. Like, I never offer that. It's just whatever, guys. Like, I already know that if you're speaking with me, probably there's much deeper stuff going on. And that's just, you know, waiting for abundance is not going to help. And I think when I was doing my work at that time, this whole law of attraction was the big thing. People were like, yay. And that was coaching world altogether. And then I remember I was like doing my work, and I suddenly started having very good success financially as well, because I understood that there's a lot of need for people like myself who are willing to take heavy cases on. And of course, this is how I started as a psychotherapist. I already worked with really, really heavy cases then. And I almost felt like on a very spiritual level that all of those kids, abused kids I was working with as a psychotherapist, and I was just not, you know, I was just like, oh my gosh, this is so hard. Life is so dark. Oh my gosh, this is happening in the world, right? And I saw it all the time. That's the work, right? And then when I, you know, 20 years later, now those kids, you would say they would be grown-ups, and they were coming to me with exactly the same stuff. And I was like, wow, I'm dealing, so like a lot, like I think a year or two of my work, it's almost I was catching up like karmically with all those people that I left behind, and they were just now adults and same stuff. And I was just, and that's when I kind of like, I had to create programs that would address trauma. Like, I don't like, right, I don't work as a life coach anymore unless it's like really, really hard to get into that container. But I mean, it's possible to do private work with me. But what I'm really dealing with is aftermath of abuse, aftermath of abandonment, aftermath of traumas, losses, like the stuff that at least I see, statistically speaking, a lot of people live. A lot of people, like when I do big presentations or speaking from stages, that's what I talk about, statistics, because I want to inspire coaches to educate themselves, to prepare to handle this, because I think a lot of people go into the industry thinking it's going to be light. They even call themselves, I'm a light worker. And
Yep.
in reality, when people are willing to pay for coach, that means they've done therapy. Like they've done a lot of things that did not work for them. So you need to be better than a therapist. You need to be better than anybody out there to actually help them, instead of just put another band-aid on and say, oh, just, I don't know, whatever a lot of coaches do. And it's kind of became the focus of my work right now, is that I train coaches. I train coaches exactly how to handle this, whether you're a business coach, whether you are health coach, you would know about psychosomatics, whether you are a relationship coach. Like, I mean, I think if we start addressing things that people live through and don't expect them to just succeed because they are motivated or inspired, you know, the slogan, just do it. It doesn't really work this way. People I worked with a lot of celebrities as well as a life coach, with a lot of 7-figure entrepreneurs, and what they were all doing, if they had some kind of a disturbing past, many of them had, it was about self-sabotage. So it's not just that you can't succeed, maybe you can through a lot of hard work. It's
Right.
just, what is it that what you had sacrificed? And there's a lot of broken marriages, a lot of broken hearts, a lot of health issues. So obviously, right? And that is
So
all just
families.
plays into, and I know it by heart because I did that. I did that to myself. So I know exactly how it works. It's like, for me, there's no escape from reality anymore. And as a spiritual teacher, what I say now is that reality check is new spirituality. If you truly want to be spiritual, you don't want to escape, you want to land, and you want to look at everything you live and take it as a, you know, it's a sign. Okay, I have to do some work, and it's okay. To do work is, it's like, it's totally normal. It's like, that's what we're here for. We're not here to just be in a bliss. And I think Mark Twain said that, right? Mark Twain had that story about this man asking for, I want to be, I want to feel good, I want to be happy, eternally happy, and the God gave him a mental illness. So he was oblivious to,
Wow.
he went insane, and then he lived in an asylum thinking he's the Napoleon and he's the king, everybody emperor, everybody loves him. I was like, well, it's possible, but that's not really who we are, right? We're better to be sane, and therefore you want to
Yeah,
be looking at your life, right?
absolutely. And when I look back at my life, there were some things that I would not have necessarily framed as trauma in the way that like the media presents them, or in comparison to somebody else's trauma. And someone shared with me that it doesn't have to be what you perceive as a trauma to be traumatic to your body. So anything that was an assault to your system that changed the way that you believed something about yourself or what you believed about life, that can be traumatic, even if it's something that was so-called simple. Like, you know, a teacher yelled at you. That can be trauma. So I just wanted to throw that out there and let people know that everyone's had trauma, and it's all that's important is that your body responded to it in the way that your body did, and not to compare yourself to others, and that it all needs to be dealt with. And when it's living and stuck in your body, it's going to create problems. And yes, it's work to get it out there, and no, life isn't all about bliss every day, but when you do the work and you get back to the core of who you are, then the possibilities of your life just like go through the roof, and the things that you can experience and the connections you can have are just unparalleled to what they can be when you're stuck.
Yeah.
It's so incredibly worth it. Yeah, and I'm just really grateful that you shared that. All really, really good points. And I'm so grateful for your time. It's horrible that you had to go through what you had to go through, but it's such a beautiful story of recovery and resilience and what you've created in your own life out of pain. And you know that from like just a perspective of like, why, why do these things happen to anybody? Well, nobody has the answer to that I know of, but you can get through them, and they can become such beautiful life-changing things, and enhance your life in ways that we don't usually talk about. Yes, it was awful, but if would you be the person that you are today if that hadn't happened to you? So I am so grateful for you taking the time to share your story, and for all the work that you've done and the work that you're doing with people now, based on everything that you've been through. And I'm curious, how are your children doing?
Whew. Well, I think we went through the darkest of times, definitely. And I think, I mean, we're doing fine. I would say it's much, definitely, they went also through the trial of medications that didn't work. So I was incredibly protective of that. Again, was I wrong or was I right? I think at the end they were telling me, I understand, Mom, why you did that, because I already knew where, that kind of misdiagnosis or medication altogether could lead, and they went through, because we kind of had the symptoms, but then my kids are I think they're also very resilient. And if anything, they learned from me that you can go through this stuff and feeling is okay. It's okay to feel whatever you feel. So I was always encouraging to, just, like my third daughter right now, because they do have all sorts of anxieties and all sorts of stuff. I did learn a lot about parenting. I actually got myself really educated at that time. Like I told you, I hired many people, and some of it was working with parenting coaches and trainings. And something I learned about anxiety is it's called general anxiety. This is how, by the way, when you said about trauma, it's very easy to check with yourself, actually, because a lot of us, like myself, I'm not an anxious person typically, and I would say that's not my problem. I'm incredibly peaceful, very zen. People like typically say, Lira, you're just so, oh my gosh, you're so, you come in, it's so good around you. However, when I started studying this whole stuff, I realized that I have general anxiety, because guess what? General anxiety comes from a stressful childhood. It doesn't have to be abuse. It doesn't have to be anything like that. But if it was stressful, just even because you moved places or because or whatever else happened, you would expect that there will be tendencies in your life. If somebody like myself who doesn't want to be anxious or doesn't love being anxious, I would do a lot of work around it, and then I would be a very controlling person. I would try to control my environment, so I wouldn't be anxious. You see, I mean, it's just a consequence. But once I understood that, when I looked at my kids, I was like, I'm not surprised, because what we lived through was incredibly stressful. And when you experience that as a child, when whatever was happening in the household, there's no wonder that they had to go through understanding anxiety. So I'm learning as we go along, and with my third daughter now, who's 17, like she is so equipped. She knows tapping, she knows journaling, she knows techniques, she can teach everybody else about how to deal with anxiety. And stories she tells me about teenagers, and all of my daughters have told me about high school, and of course I talk about those statistics as well. Statistics are terrible for teenagers and what's going on there in their lives, what they go through. It's incredibly stressful.
Yep.
And it's like hard to think of our work that I see. As actually, when I started doing the work, I remember I was telling myself, I said, you know why I'm doing this? Because I understand, like, I would love to help my kids and to get rid of all anxieties and heal them. And so, because I do that with other people on a regular basis, right? Especially as a life coach, I've worked with people in crises all the time and gotten them out of heavy stuff really fast. So it's my skill. And with them, they needed somebody else, like just the same thing. You can't treat your own kids. And I remember when I started training coaches, I said, you know what, I'm going to train a coach that's going to treat my kids because somebody needs to understand how to do this work.
Yes.
So it's like my kids are big inspiration for me. So I think we having a generation of kids, not just my kids, all of those kids out there who are growing up in a much more stressful world than we had. And they would need a coach. They would need somebody to navigate that and not to be fallen into a system where they would just given pills again, because that's unfortunately what happens a lot.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And we're all our own persons. We're all going to interpret everything differently. We all have our own healing paths. And even though and hopefully you'll be able to help them by leading by example and then share some of your tools so that they'll choose to do in those things. But sometimes you also have to just back off a little bit and let them do their own thing and see if they can find their way and just hold space for them.
Yeah.
It can be difficult to do because, of course, once you know all of these things, you want your kids to benefit from the same thing, but they're not necessarily going to choose that pathway, or, your best friend or your husband, or, everybody has their own journey. So all you can do is offer and support. And that can be a really hard space, especially as a healer, to let other people do their own thing and watch other people suffer. But
yeah, that's what I call it, the lesson in separation, because that was the hard thing, to let it go and say, you are old enough to now.
Yeah.
Just,
and I'm here for you.
if you have to go through this dip, you will go through this, and I can just take you and hold you within that process and say, I'm here for you, but that's it. That's it. That's nothing else is, so it's very, it's interesting process, but I think the answer to your question, I think we're in a much better place. It's like, whew.
And I hope they come out of it as beautifully as you've done. So just to wrap up, I know you have some programs and a book, and I want to share all of that in links just because it's easier that way. So I just wanted to let everybody know. Again, I'm so grateful for your time, for sharing your story. I think it's so incredibly powerful. I think it will really help. Just help people understand the possibilities and open their minds. And that's really what I'm all about, is sharing all of those kind of things for people, because way too many people suffer from things that are preventable and fixable. And that just really needs to change.
Yeah. Well, the easiest link to have is schoolofinspiredlife.com.
Okay.
So that's the easiest one. And there's a Facebook group